Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks everyone for being here. Today we have a double session of the Thursday BRIA seminar, which is also the Civipol General Seminar in a hybrid format. The first presenter will be Bruno Castanho Silva, which is visiting professor at Civipol and at BRIAS at the moment, who is assistant professor for empirical social research at the Free University of Berlin. You have a background, your PhD was from Central European University. He's been working in Cologne, Center for Comparative Research, and he works, predominantly on quantitative methods, causal inference, populism, and many other topics. And today he'll speak about public opinion perceptions of naturalized citizens' rights and duties. Thank you very much, Bruno, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation, for the chance to be here. I'm quite excited to talk about this project. So it's a project that, the specific presentation today, it's based on one paper, but the idea is to make this into a little bit of a bigger project, so I'm very curious to hear any feedback that people might have. Also, if you're very critical about this is not going to go anywhere, please feel free to tell me. It's working on public opinion perceptions of naturalized citizens' rights, duties, etc., political rights in Europe. And this comes from the observation that citizenship politics is back on the news. So citizenship itself, if we go back to political theory, political philosophy, is one of the oldest questions we have, right? Who belongs to the polis, who belongs to the state? But this has been politicized again in recent years across much of the global north. So, for example, in Germany, during coalition negotiations last year, there was a proposal to strip the citizenship of people who were accused of supporting terrorism or being anti-Semitic. In the end, that proposal was dropped, but there's still discussions today at high levels of government to strip citizenship, for example, of people who commit crimes. Trump has floated the idea of removing the citizenship of people who criticize him. There was a bill introduced in Congress a few months ago to make it easier for the State Department itself to revoke American passports from Americans for different reasons. This was also a debate in the Netherlands. So last year, Geert Wilders proposed this, revoking citizenship for people who committed crimes. It was part of his 10-point plan, the whole discussion around it, which brought down the radical right coalition. And we can keep going with multiple examples from other countries on how revoking citizenship or determining who gets citizenship or not is highly politicized again today. And what that leads me to the question of we just don't know very much about how does the public see this, right? It's highly prominent in the politics of several countries. It is a very harsh measure. I mean, citizenship sometimes is called the right to have rights, and stripping that from someone for a post on social media seems to be rather harsh, in my opinion. But we don't really have much indications of how does the rest of the public, single nationality, natural-born citizens, see these measures. So we came to the question of how tolerant are natural-born citizens, or citizens in general, of the political rights and the citizenship duties of naturalized citizens compared to other citizens and also long-term residents. So a little bit of theory here. So the classic model of citizenship, you might have heard of it, comes from Marshall in 1950, and says that citizenship rights have evolved through 3 generations. So we have first civic rights, political rights, and social rights. So civic rights are just the protection of person and property. That was the earlier to be developed. Then you get political rights. People have the right to participate in politics, to express themselves, and so on and so forth. And finally, the last wave of citizenship rights would be the social rights. So you have a right to basic social protections from the state. There's lots of criticisms to this model. It only applies to Britain. It doesn't translate that well to other countries. And primarily, today, only really of those 3 waves, political rights are the ones that are really associated with citizenship. If you fall within a certain country's jurisdiction, you're expected to pay your taxes, to obey the law. Your person and your property are going to be protected in general, even if you're not a citizen. And also social rights. We're in a post-national view of social rights in Europe. So even people who are not citizens have access to basic social protection. But political participation is the one that is mostly connected to citizenship. So with a few exceptions, you gotta be a citizen to vote in national elections, to be elected in national elections. Like, we know that in Europe, within the EU, there's a few exceptions to that, but in the majority of cases, particularly voting and being elected is something that is still connected to citizenship rights. Now, the literature on citizenship right today has converged on this consensus that there's an emerging or a consensual view in global north countries of what they call conditional citizenship. It is that people who naturalize or who are expected to naturalize into a country, they have to fulfill certain conditions, and they have to keep fulfilling those conditions even after the naturalization process. So Spiro has a very good book on the history of dual citizenship and so on, where he shows how naturalized citizens have historically been seen with suspicion across countries. His book focuses a lot in the US, but across countries that applies. But today we have a lot of this idea of conditional or earned citizenship. So people who live in a country for a long time, they are expected to pass citizenship tests and show that they know the history, they know the culture, that they integrated, that they fulfill several criteria. They've never had any problem with the law, so they've been very good and well behaved. So you have to be a model person in this idea to be able to gain this privilege of, we are going to grant you our citizenship. And so these naturalized citizens, they have to prove themselves to earn this privilege. And this, what the literature has called this moral checking, does not stop once the process of citizenship acquiring is over. So you continue to be evaluated. Are you still behaving as you're supposed to behave once you got your citizenship? And if not, we can kick you out. And it comes to this idea of one being a guest in one's own country. This is particularly a theme for second-generation immigrants, people who were born in the country to an ethnic minority, for example, and they are continuously still treated as if they're immigrants, as if they're a guest in the country where they're born in, they're citizens of. And it comes from this view that is connected to the idea of this conditional citizenship, of seeing these people as a guest. So this is our house, we are the national majority, and you're a guest here, and guests are expected to be well behaved, right? If I let you sleep in my guest bedroom and I give you my food, you're not gonna come and criticize me and say bad things about me. So this guest metaphor is fairly strongly rooted in these ideas of this earned or conditional citizenship for naturalized citizens. So this leads to the first three hypotheses that I have for this paper. So basically the idea that naturalized citizens are seen as not having the same rights, or there's not enough, as much tolerance towards their political rights as there is to natural-born citizens. So the first hypothesis, for instance, the respondents, I'll talk a little bit about the method and design in a bit, but basically they will be less willing to grant voting rights to critical naturalized citizens than to critical citizens who are natural born. So there's less tolerance for those naturalized citizens who are critical of the country than for the natural born citizens who are critical of the country. And this focuses on this idea of critical citizens exactly because of this idea of the guest metaphor of, you're supposed to continue being grateful to us that we gave you this immense privilege of granting you our wonderful citizenship. The other two are also related to political participation rights. So there's less tolerance for granting free speech rights to naturalized citizens than to the natural-born citizens, and less willingness to grant rights to peacefully demonstrate for the naturalized citizens than to natural-born citizens. So this much about political rights, but I was also interested in looking at duties. And of duties associated with citizenship, there's a lot that have been discussed over time, both in theory and in practice, so paying taxes or obeying the law, but these are not really constrained to citizenship. If you're within a country's jurisdiction, you should obey their laws. If you fall within their tax jurisdiction, you have to pay the taxes either because you live there or you work there or that's where you make your money. So these are not necessarily connected to citizenship in most countries. But the one that still is, mostly for male citizens, is military service, particularly in case of an actual foreign invasion or something. And especially now, this is getting more and more prominent. So there the idea is that immigrants, or there's some literature on how immigrants, not talking about citizens, they're seen as having the same duties but not the same rights as as the majority of the populations, which is referred to as asymmetric acceptance. And so this brings the fourth hypothesis, which is that respondents will have a perception that naturalized citizens have the same level of duty than the natural born when it comes to serving the military in case of a foreign invasion. So we don't want to grant you as much rights to demonstrate, to vote, and etc. if you're critical, but if Russia comes, you go and die for us. So that is sort of the idea for it. And finally, as I started talking about how revoking citizenship has become more and more prominent these days, the fifth hypothesis is that respondents are more willing to revoke the citizenship of people who are critical of the country if they're naturalized than if they are natural born. So how do I go about it? I ran a survey. It was run online in June and July 2025 with Dinata. So this is a company that provides online panels of decent quality for decent price, so much better than Prolific or MTurk, maybe not as good quality as YouGov, but we'll see in a minute that they actually gave us pretty decent data. So it's run in 4 countries, the survey. It's Germany, Netherlands, Poland, and Spain. So these are countries with different types of citizenship regimes, different histories of who becomes naturalized in this country. So Spain is the biggest of the former colonial powers. Most of the naturalized citizens in Spain, they come from former colonies, they share the language, they share the religion, so there's less of a cultural gap there, so it's an interesting case to observe. Poland is the more closed of those. It's the smallest proportion of naturalized citizens. Naturalization laws is the most restrictive, so it's a good one to see, also because this has become more of a question with the arrival of Ukrainian refugees in Poland. Germany has been changing their citizenship rules for the last few years, and this has been fairly salient, both in election campaigns and in actual political discussions. So it's an interesting country to see that had a very, very strong tradition of ethno-cultural understandings of citizenship, or ethno-nationalist understandings of citizenship, moving towards more jus soli rules of if you're born here, then it's easier to get a citizenship, and that has received a backlash in recent years. So it's a nice sample to see how these different institutional factors might affect people's views. So there were quotas for age, gender, education, region. The quotas worked pretty well for all of those in all of these countries, except for education in Germany and Poland. So lower educated respondents are underrepresented, which I'll discuss a bit later, the potential issues that might arise for inference, but overall the quotas work pretty well. So just to exemplify, I have here a graph with the voting intentions for all of these 4 countries for the different parties. So we see that in Germany, the vote and the X on this graph indicates the polling average for that party in July 1st, 2025, so right in the middle of the field work. And the bars are how much support these parties have in our samples. So in Germany, it's actually pretty close. Everything is within the margin of error of the actual polling averages. So this gives us good confidence that we're getting a good sample out of it. In Poland, we are we have fewer than respondents than we should have supporting the Law and Justice Party, so the radical right at this point, and more than we should have for Civic Platform, the governing centrist party, I suppose. So this is a reflection of us having more middle and higher educated respondents and undersampling on the lower educated respondents. For the other countries in the Netherlands, there's a few hit and misses, but this was right after the coalition fell, electoral campaign going on, and the polls were a mess. They were going up and down and sideways. But overall, we get fairly decent representation for most of these parties. And in Spain, for the center-right Popular Party, we also have a bit fewer respondents than maybe there should be, but otherwise, it's a fairly good sample. Now, to test the hypothesis, I use a wording experiment. So this is inspired by this paper by Heinmüller and Hiscox in the APSR in 2010 that tries to look at people's preferences for highly skilled versus lower skilled immigration. And I adapt the wording combined with a question from the Americas Barometer from a few waves in the 2000s, 2010s, which asks people for their tolerance towards certain rights for people who only criticize the country. So the original America's Barometer question measures political tolerance with a wording that goes, some people only criticize our country. How much do you approve of these people's rights to vote, to participate in demonstrations, to make speeches, and etc.? And what I do here is to randomly show for the respondents, so there's 4 categories. Some respondents will see some of country citizens, so just some Germans, some Poles, some Spaniards. The second option is to see an actual explicit indication of some natural-born citizens, so some natural-born Poles, Germans, etc. The third treatment category is some naturalized Germans, Poles, Dutch, etc. And the fourth, as a little bit of a baseline to see is this about immigration or is it about, or does the citizenship status make a difference, is foreigners who live and work in the country. So this is our baseline of how much people see their rights. And then it goes, once you see one of these four options, express only negative views about our country's form of government, not just about the current administration, but about the system of government itself. So this is the question that comes straight from the political tolerance question of the Americas Barometer. The idea being that even if someone is very critical of the country, of the system of government, they still should have the right to vote and to demonstrate. So the outcomes, once you see that, how much do you approve of these people's right to vote in elections, to peacefully demonstrate, to make their points, to appear on television, to make speeches, to be drafted into the military in case of a foreign invasion, and to lose their citizenship or their right to live in the country. So the right to live in the country in case of the long-term residence. So if you're taking our survey, this is the German version, this is what you would see. So there's the description here on top. Some German citizens say only negative things. How much would you agree, or do you approve of these people's right to, and then we have the 5 rights here, and on a scale of 1 through 7. So the results, what do we find? And I'm focusing these results on comparing the citizen categories. I have a slide later if someone's curious with the long-term residents, but they have much less approval, so it's a bit harder to see the other effects. So starting with the right to vote, we see that in the 4 countries, so the darker brown dot is the average approval or the average response for the naturalized citizen condition. And it has, in most of the countries, except for Spain, it's a bit smaller, but in most of the countries, it's a gap of around 1 full point on that original 1 to 7 scale, which is as big a difference as I've seen working in political behavior in 10 years. So we see that there's very little difference between the treatment groups of natural born versus just saying someone is a citizen. So it's clear that if you say some Germans, most people assume some natural born Germans, and it doesn't make a difference to highlight that or not. So this is the case for all the countries. But when we talk about critical naturalized citizens, people are significantly and substantively less likely to approve of their right to vote, which again, these are citizens. They say bad things about the country, but the first right you have as a citizen is you can vote in elections, right? This should be incontroversial. And it's interesting also that the right to vote is actually the biggest effect in most of the cases. So if we look at the other 3 participation questions, so free speech and freedom to peacefully demonstrate, there's also differences in all countries except for Spain. But they are much smaller than the difference in approving of these people's right to vote. So people still have less tolerance for those critical citizens to demonstrate, to appear on TV, make speeches, but it's not as bad as, no, they really should not be allowed to vote, which I find quite fascinating, personally. When we look at the duties, the picture changes. So in Spain, there's no difference whatsoever in whether they should be drafted to the army to support. There's no difference between naturalized, natural-born citizens. Everyone has to protect us. In Germany, it's actually slightly higher that the naturalized citizens should be drafted to go defend us from the Russians. But this difference is barely significant, depending on the comparison. In Poland and in the Netherlands, it's a bit lower, but again, it's much less of a difference than what we observe with the rights. So for the rights, there's a huge gap between naturalized, natural-born citizens. For the duty, it's a fairly small gap, not even significant, depending on which exact group we are comparing. And when it comes to the punishment of losing the citizenship, we also see that there's a much higher approval of removing the citizenship of someone who's critical of the country in 3 of the cases, not the case in Spain. Now, the question that often comes up is, well, isn't this just anti-immigrant attitudes? So what I do is I interact the treatment with one of 2 questions, or with both of these questions separately. The first, we have a question asking people, how comfortable do you feel if someone from an ethnic minority becomes the prime minister or the president? So this is, I take it to indicate racism. We can argue what the concept is. And the other is, how important is the agreement with the item, how important is it that to be born in the country for a person to be truly national? So this is an indication of perceptions of anti-immigrant perceptions, or that was the best proxy I could find for anti-immigrant perceptions or for more this ethno-nationalist conception of citizenship. And the interactions here focus on a comparison between citizen and natural-born citizen pulled together. We've seen that there's very little difference in how people react to these two groups versus naturalized citizens. So the first one with how comfortable are you with an ethnic minority person becoming the prime minister or the president. The bars here are the distribution of answers to this question. 10 is the most uncomfortable, 0, 1 is the most comfortable you are per country. And this is the gap between naturalized and natural-born citizens. So the more negative this number is on the y-axis, the bigger the difference that people attribute to naturalized versus natural-born, or negative difference, right? And as we would expect, those who are extremely uncomfortable with someone from an ethnic minority to get the highest position in the country, those are the ones for whom the effect is the largest. So those are the ones who see the most difference between naturalized and natural-born citizens. But in all of the countries, even for the people who answer with a 1 in this question, who are the most comfortable with an ethnic minority coming to power, the effect is still negative and significant. So all of these, the effect is below 0, and it is actually a significant effect, even among the people who ostensibly say, I have no problem with ethnic minorities becoming prime minister. They still think they are still more likely to say, well, the naturalized citizens should not have a right to vote if they're too critical, more than for the natural-born. It's a similar thing when we look at this question of how important it is for someone to be truly national to have been born in the country, though in Spain is the one where for the lowest values it's not a significant impact, but for the other 3 it is quite significant, even for the people who with the lowest level of agreeing to this item. And the picture looks the same for the other rights and duties, so this was run for all of the outcomes. So, in conclusion, natural-born citizens do show much less tolerance for naturalized citizens' political rights and duties, but they attribute pretty much the same level of duties when it comes to primarily citizenship duty of defending your country from in a foreign invasion. So it's what I call the shut up and die type of attitude. So this is the first investigation on public opinions of attitudes towards naturalized citizens and their rights. There's obviously a lot of work on immigrants and attitudes towards immigrants and attitudes by immigrants. I have a whole rant on the paper about how that's not good at this point anymore. So naturalized citizens, the advantage here is that it's a very clearly defined legal category. If you're a naturalized citizen, if you're a citizen, you have a right to vote, and if people see this differently, this is violating, or this is not exactly in line with the idea of equality before the law. And these are groups that are, again, from a legal perspective, it's a very clear definition what your rights and your duties are. So how do people see this is the question. Then it's clear that it's fairly widespread to have these views of earned or conditional citizenship that keep existing even after people acquire their citizenship. They still have to continue having a good behavior, not being a bad guest in someone else's house. This also speaks to work on other critical minorities, other groups that are at the borders of belonging to the bigger political community. So we can think of other groups that are also not included in the center of certain political communities in global north countries, and how their rights of being critical also play here. And this comes at a time when, as I said earlier, this topic is increasingly politicized by elites. We repeatedly have calls to denaturalize citizens who do X, Y, Z in different European countries. So how do people see this? Seems to be fairly important to see where we are going. So that was it. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you for this great presentation and important research. I think this earned citizenship idea taps into something really important and new in our societies, and it's brilliant that empirical research is conducted on that. So congratulations with this important research. I have a question from a gender perspective, because of course immigrant issues, politics evolving around migration and so on and so forth, they are highly gendered and more so. So I was wondering how this then sits with your research, because as you mentioned, you take military service into account. You explicitly said, yeah, this is a male issue. No problem with that whatsoever. But then there's also this entire literature on intimate citizenship that is, gives the opportunity to actually take on board more gender issues, which I think would contribute to this research, because I think the idea of earned citizenship is highly gendered as well. It is about how your family, what your family looks like, how many children you have, whom you marry to, what your sexual expression should be like, and so on and so forth. So I think it would be fascinating to complement the military service with this intimate citizenship literature, and then also compensate the male issue you include with a more female-oriented issue. I think it would make much sense for your research. But thank you. It's a great presentation and great research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I think that's an excellent point. That for a next iteration, I would definitely want to incorporate this dimension more, because here, you're absolutely right. Like, it focuses on one issue that is mostly masculine, but it would be very, very interesting to take this. And I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with the intimate citizenship literature, but I'll read definitely more into it. Thank you very much for the for the comments, for the suggestions. I'll work on that and report what happens.
Hi, maybe I can build on those comments a little bit. Thank you for the presentation. To be honest, is this on? Okay. Yeah. I found it a bit confusing, because you seem not really to be talking about citizenship, but rather, as you mentioned, immigration, racism, nationalism, belonging, membership. And I couldn't quite work out why you started with this kind of presentation on a liberal understanding of citizenship. So you started with Marshall, who, as you said, contested, but then you didn't really add to this the literature on feminist understandings of citizenship, ecological understandings of citizenship. There's a huge Republican understandings of citizenship. There's a huge body of work that's come out of the last couple of decades on citizenship, which challenges that kind of liberal understanding and talks about the different kind of virtues and the different kind of duties and the different kind of critical acts that constitute citizenship. So I'm thinking of Engin Aysen, for example, which would be interesting, like how you don't, you're not just given citizenship, you become a citizenship through critical acts. So I guess I wanted you to kind of clarify exactly where your position is in terms of the model of, because you talked about these 4 countries, and I'm thinking each of these countries has a very different understanding of citizenship, right? You didn't include France, which notoriously has a very different understanding of citizenship to Germany. So maybe it seemed to me like the results you were presenting were quite generalized, and there was no kind of acknowledgement of the different understandings of citizenship within the different countries. But just to add to Karen's point, so ecological citizenship, I mean, there's a lot of work now talking about how the welfare state's become greened and how citizens are expected to recycle and they have certain ecological duties and virtues that come along with that package of citizenship. So I would just be interested for you to reflect on why you've zoomed on this particular model of citizenship, and whether there is maybe a little bit of diversity in the understandings of the public on different ways citizenship can be understood.
Right. Thanks. I think that's a very good point, and I would look more into taking that into more depth. I think the reason for focusing on these is that let's say there are certainly very different understandings of what citizenship entails, or what would be the duty. So there's a whole literature on what are the duties of a good citizen, right? But these do not differentiate based on the, say, legal status of you're a citizen, yes or no, how did you acquire your citizenship, yes or no, right? At least that's my understanding. Maybe I'm completely wrong on that. So there's a lot of discussion, yeah, what citizens are expected to do ecologically and et cetera and so on and so forth, what kind of values you're supposed to have. So the International Social Survey Program, they have these modules on citizenship, and there's a lot of questions on that. But my interest here was more focusing quite specifically on, let's say, the legal aspect and leaving out the different types of possible conceptions of citizenship, and rather focusing on the, if we keep everything else constant, there's these two people, they are citizens, they are critical of the country. One of them acquired their citizenship in this way, one of them acquired their citizenship in this way. So are they seen differently by the majority, right? Regardless of any other understandings of what is required from a citizen, or how do we understand citizenship in this country? Very simply, if people are informed these two are citizens, then this is, let's say, kept constant in a way. That would be my answer. So that's why, going back to this idea, let's say more of the liberal perception of these two are citizens, how citizenship is understood might not come so much into play, but do we attribute them different types of rights purely based on how that citizenship was acquired? So this is more the interest that I have here, and that I think has not been really explored before. So it's not a question of what makes someone a citizen, what makes someone a good citizen. These are important questions, but not really the focus of this particular project. So that would be my answer.
Thank you for the presentation. I found it, I am a naturalized citizen, so this spoke to me in a quite personal way, in a sense. I think the answer you gave now, it's actually the perfect pitch for your paper, in the sense that it became clearer and clearer while you were presenting that your question is really, how is citizenship understood? Is it understood as, in the legal sense, as having the citizenship, or is it understood more at a national identity attitude level, right? And I think probably that framework would give more justice to your paper. I think it's also a more interesting idea, because, as you said, it's way more unexplored, in the sense that when we think of citizenship, I think that naturally, if you're not a lawyer or somebody who is really into the topic, or a scholar really interested in rules, you tend to go to an idea that it's more questions that are more psychological. Do I belong? And I think you're trying to show, to disentangle how people think. Do people think in a legal way? Do people think in a more emotional identity, whatever way, right? And I think it's a very good selling point. But it's true that now you open with kind of a causing question. Couple of things I would have liked to know when you presented. It's whether in these countries they have jus soli or jus sanguinis, because I think that might also give a different reading to the findings. And another thing that I would have loved to see, if not a latent class analysis, whether there were differences in this average among relevant socio-demographic, like ideological positioning, gender, other things that you might have in the question. But I mean at income, so the basic socio-demographic you would have, age. I would expect that maybe younger people have maybe a different views than older people. So seeing how the average change across the social demographic, I think I would have loved to see that. And then something that I apologize in advance, because it's not really a direct comment to your paper, but I would have done it this way, but I hope it's helpful. I think that what you're touching here tangentially to, it's another two concepts, and indeed are the concept of identity, and I think that approaching it a bit more frontally would benefit your paper a lot. But there is also a question of reciprocity. So basically, I feel that what you're asking to these people, to your respondents, is, do you think that they should be reciprocal to you, for example, in the duties, in going for the arming, because they were given citizenship. But I think reciprocity, it's the huge underlying question or a concept that is not spelled out here. And if you're developing this line of research, it's probably impossible to do it with the quantitative data, but I wonder whether it would complement this, actually having, for example, qualitative focus group, qualitative interviews with naturalized citizens. Because you were talking, and I was saying, I am a naturalized citizen, I hold double nationality, but if you ask me, which nationality do you have? I'm always going to give you the nationality of where I was born. I am a naturalized Belgian, but I am born Italian. So when you ask me, I will always say I'm Italian, right? So there is a question of identity that goes beyond, even in the naturalized citizens, it goes somewhere else that it's not legal. And I wonder actually how the naturalized citizens would feel towards that. Do they feel that they have the right to do these things? Do they feel, if somebody tomorrow would ask me to, I mean, maybe here the gender plays a role, ask me to go in an army to defend Belgium, I would flee to Italy in 2 seconds. There's no question about that. I'm not going to war, right? But I think that reciprocity, it's somewhere interesting where to go, and maybe actually also the expectation of reciprocity. I wonder whether people feel that way because they think that naturalized citizens would do what I would do, right? But thank you. This was really fascinating.
Thank you so much. This is excellent, and I wrote down here how do the naturalized citizens see this, and underlined several times, because I think that is a very important question, exactly to understand these views from the other side. And as I said, like the idea is to see is this viable for a bigger project. So I think a next step would definitely be to try to use at least experiments or some sort of survey data to get into these mechanisms, right? Is it about gratitude? Is it about reciprocity? Is it about who do people picture as belonging to these different groups, and how does the identity play a role in there? So I think these are things to look into as a next step. But here was just like, here's the first thing to look into, the very general, and then we move on to these things. So on the relevant social demographics, I did an interaction by party. It's surprisingly little difference on the treatment effects by party across the 4 countries. There is some difference on education, which, so the more educated, the more, let's say, liberal your attitude is on this, which indicates that any results for, say, Germany or Poland are probably underestimating whatever the true result is because of the issue with the quota. That's what I mentioned earlier. They didn't really investigate so much more on the other social demographics because, mostly because there was a pre-registration plan for the hypothesis test and experiment, and I was like, I'm just going to follow this, not start deviating too much. Regarding the laws of these countries, so this is also something that they vary. So Poland is a very strict jus sanguinis case. Germany has been moving towards accepting more of a jus soli law. The Netherlands, as far as I understand, has a jus soli, but this of the 4, the one that has least acceptance for dual citizenship. So you can only keep your original if you are not allowed to resign from it. And Spain is the most liberal of the 4 in terms of citizenship laws. But yeah, should have indicated that on the slides. And I think, I'm just going back through the questions upwards. And I think the question of like identity and so on, that is definitely the next thing to investigate, either with surveys or with, as you said, like qualitative interviewing, talking to people, how do they feel about it. And as an anecdote, I find it always very interesting. I presented this paper once or twice already, and naturalized citizens or long-term residents give very different feedback than other people. So it's always nice to hear the views on how people react to this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. My question is actually built very much on what Luana was saying. I had one question about left-right differences, and you already sort of responded to that. I'm not that surprised that you don't find much differences. I mean, in the end, quite a few proposals to strip naturalized citizenship of the nationality came from left-wing parties. I mean, France is a case in point. I would have loved, since I think the project is extremely promising, I would have loved you to tell us more on how you plan to explore cross-national differences. And in that respect, there are two things. One is about the military service. To what extent do you believe that your findings are at least partly inflated by the public debate on military service that there is at the time in which you run your survey? I mean, I think if you could find as a benchmark a question on military service from 10 years ago, I think the results might be different. I mean, ask whether naturalized citizens should do the military service 10 years ago, who cares? I mean, it was just, who cares about the military service at a time in which it's not a salient thing or having an army or having to defend the borders. And then I wanted to jump back to the thing that Luana said at the beginning, that in the end, it doesn't matter so much the actual citizenship regime that these countries have, because what you are interested in is the public understanding of that citizenship regime. And I want to make an anecdote, I use an anecdote there as well. I mean, I had a child 3 years ago in France, and I was sure, since the Front National has been campaigning for 40 years on abolishing the jus soli, I was sure I would have a natural-born French citizen. And when I discovered this was not the case, I was very disappointed, because my child will be a naturalized French citizen, not a natural-born French citizen, because there's no jus soli. But the public understanding in France is that they do have a jus soli that you can compare to the US one. And I think in this respect, what you would have perhaps to include items or look for items on how do citizens understand their citizenship regime rather than what it actually is, because often they are so complex that people only have a very rough understanding of how it works.
Thanks so much. And yeah, this last point, I think it's extremely valid, right? If people don't have to engage with the actual citizenship acquiring process, they have no idea how complicated it is. And you see that in all countries. Like, heard anecdotes from the US, from Germany, that when people don't know how the troubles of going through to get a naturalization, they just assume like, oh yeah, you go to an office, you apply, and that's it. No, it's a whole different nightmare, and it would be very interesting indeed to see how do people perceive, how do people acquire the citizenship, and what are the actual steps, and so on and so forth. So that would actually be great. I think on the military service, my argument would be that it is more interesting to look at it exactly when it is actually salient than when it isn't, because that's when it matters, right? If you go back 10 years, and it's absolutely unimaginable, or it was for us poor, innocent people, that there would be a major war where this might become relevant. It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. But it matters once it is salient and once this is a possibility in the horizon, right? So this is the time to ask about these types of questions. So I would say that in that sense, it's good that the survey ran when it did, when there was already discussions now that's been implemented into law, for example, in Germany, of conscription, right? So all of these debates that are happening in different European countries, this is when we want to know how do people see these rights and duties, because that's when it matters, not when this is completely unimaginable and yeah, you're asking them what's your favorite type of juice. Cross-national differences, I think, so I refrain from talking too much about this here. I mean, I have only 4 countries, it's one survey experiment, so we can speculate a little bit as to why there's some differences. But I think this will take much more, doing case studies, so going forward with the project, doing actual case studies, seeing how it evolved over time, finding questions for a longer period, establishing or understanding some baselines, how does that change? So this would be one way of going about it and trying to really see how different understandings of identity, cultural identity and so on and so forth, how different understandings of the legal system play a role into these perceptions. And these are things that develop over time. But I think that would take, like getting data, going back over some years, also political discourses, how they have developed over time, and what kind of arguments have been used, what has been present in the media and public debates to do that. But again, that would be the next, one of the next parts of a bigger project. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. It's maybe not more question, but my reflection and my comments. I think that your research gives me a lot of insights just right now. I can't maybe structure everything now, but for my future, I can explain why. Because I am from Ukraine. That's why your research now, it's so close to me. Not directly to me, but I mean for whole Ukraine, who are, for example, stay now in Belgium or in other countries, Germany, Poland, and others. And just right now, in this year, we have some question in political level. What we can do with Ukrainian people. And even now started a lot of questionnaires about what is the idea for Ukrainian people? What do they want? Continue to stay in that country there they live, for example, 3 years and more, or they want to come back to Ukraine. It's also about perception. It's also about legal rules. It's also about integration. And the first my insight was so the program of integration and adaptation has to be changed. It's exactly because what I saw also on my view, it's not useful. It just push people to learn rules, learn language, but it's not about integration or like rights or something social integration, something like this. And I think it will be very interesting in future. Look to your research due two lines. One lines. It's if you are naturalized by normal circumstances, means you come to another country to work and it's your choice because you want it. It's one line. And the second line, for example, like Ukrainian, they don't want to go out of their country. It's another circumstances, like they have to do it because it's safety, because it's other things, it's crisis and it's war, and it means it's but I saw that a lot of Ukrainian people which stay now in different countries, they want to be naturalized because they pay 3 years their life, they do a lot of things, efforts, and also the war is not changed and the situation is not quite easy and not understandable in future. It means the perception, but during 3 years, Ukrainian pay a lot of things to that country where they live. I know a lot of statistics, especially in Germany and in Poland, that a lot of Ukrainian people make a lot of business, a lot of taxes, and it means help also growing and development that countries, and they can be naturalized, but they haven't some limited, and this is limited about social or legal. It's not every time understandable perception. Maybe this is two line will be very interesting, and maybe we can also do something together, but looking also and take in account Ukrainian in your, for example, your research, not only Poland, Germany, or Spain, something like this. Yeah, thank you very much. And one more about military. Thank you very much. It's my reflection on your some comments. For example, if I imagine that I will be naturalized in Belgium, citizenship, but I always say also that I'm Ukrainian, not Belgium. It's also one my reflection. And 2 days ago, I visited defense, and I say to them, I want to work in your defense, because in Ukraine I work in National Guard, I work in Minister of Defense. For me, it's very understandable. And I said, I want to work. And they said, no, you can't, because you are Ukrainian, you are not Belgium, and that's why it's limited to you. It's also one of my perception of other things. Yeah, thank you very much.
No, thank you very much for the comments, and I think that's definitely one thing to explore is like, yeah. On the one hand, the focus on citizenship ignores these questions of what was the life path that brought someone to naturalize, right? And there's multiple different ones. There's naturalized citizens who they're naturalized, but they were born in the country. They just didn't have the citizenship in the beginning for one reason or another, and then eventually they naturalized. And there's others who, yeah, they came into that country within a few years and got the naturalization. There are some naturalized citizens who never lived in the country, but they use rules of jus sanguinis to get because their grandparents were from there. So I think it would be interesting also to explore a little bit more of these differences within naturalization, natural born, and so on. Yeah, no, but thanks so much.
Yeah, for me also, thank you for the excellent, very clear presentation. I really enjoyed your findings. Although, for me, I think as well as for others that have already spoken, they raise more questions than answers, which is good for your bigger project, I think. And one of the things that I keep coming back to, also in your answers to others that have spoken before, is how meaningful is your insistence on focusing on this legal dimension in survey research? Because as we know, like one of the problems with research doing surveys is that you don't know what the people are thinking when they are answering your questions, right? You have some controlled questions for this, but I'm wondering to what extent do your respondents know what naturalization means exactly? How do they envision it differently? And the literature that has been suggested before about different conceptions of citizenship, I think addresses some of these issues. And for, like, just to give an example, I think priming your survey respondents with different types of people who are all similarly naturalized for the law, but look and have a very different history, also building on what the person from Ukraine just said, right? I'm sure that you would get very different answers to your question if you show them a person from the global south who fled a conflict situation, or who is just here for economic reasons and tries to sort of make money for the people at home, for example, right? And if you show them a refugee from Ukraine, or even somebody from, just on the periphery, somewhere else on the periphery of the European borders, who are not EU citizens but are perceived as such, right? People from Norway or Switzerland, I'm thinking, right? And so I was wondering, if you have thoughts on this from the perspective of, just asking them about naturalization. I also kept coming back to racism, right? And in this regard, I think it's very interesting. You don't find so much ideological variation. So I actually think your findings are very interesting from the perspective of, I think they show something else, right? But what that then is, I think you could maybe disentangle a bit further by delving more into, okay, so what do the people think when they answer this question, right? Is it racism? Is it not racism? For whom of your respondents is it racism? So yeah, these were just all thoughts that that came up, and I think it's a very promising, bigger project that you have in front of you.
Thanks. No, I think that is spot on, right? That a natural next step would be to vary the characteristics and then see how does that affect, because it's likely that this is driving at least some of the results. So let's say my, post hoc explanation for effects in Spain are somewhat smaller is because people in Spain have a view of naturalized citizens most likely as these are people who came from Latin America. So they speak the language, they are Catholics mostly, there's more of a cultural connection. So there's a little bit of this element going on, though there's still a lot of racism in Spain in relation to Latin Americans, right? So it's not like we're all friends and kumbaya. So it would be definitely a very good next step to see how this plays. And it's interesting when you mentioned that, you're not so surprised, or that it's interesting that there's not so much effect by ideology. I think what I'm tapping into is just like some views of who counts as a citizen of, like, in some countries at least, of this ethno-national conception are just so ingrained that they cut across ideological perceptions, and even people who are fairly progressive or fairly liberal still have this very ingrained in them. I mean, just anecdotally, but I had a conversation at some point with someone in Germany that they're very left-wing and progressive and everything, and then we're talking about some other issues. And they mentioned about some areas of Berlin where you have a lot of people with migration background, and they're like, oh yeah, but the people doing this, they're not German, they're Turkish. And I'm like, these are kids that they were born here. Their parents were probably born here, their grandparents were not. And you, a very liberal, progressive person, are telling me, no, but they're not German. They're not really German, right? And this cuts across ideology. So I think going more into this, that is not just partisanship, is the natural next step. Yeah.
No, it works. Thank you. So I have two comments. First, about the revoking voting rights. So you said there were no party differences, right? Because I was wondering whether people associate naturalized citizens with a specific parties, and that they would revoke the voting rights just because they would think it would boost their in-party vote share. So maybe if you had questions about people's perception of vote choice among naturalized citizens, that could be interesting. Because this would mean that this revoking voting rights is partly instrumental and the result of partisan loyalty. And the second point is, I was wondering whether you think that you would find differences if you vary the types of criticisms. So, if person criticizes government policy, maybe they wouldn't be willing to revoke their rights, but if they criticize something fundamental to the country's conceptualization of nation, then you would have a bigger effect. Maybe, you could explore these differences. Good luck with the rest.
No, thanks so much. And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? It's just when you cue naturalized citizen, even if you keep criticism constant, people will associate different types of criticism with it. And I think it does make a lot of sense to then, in the next step, vary the type of criticism or be very clear about what type of criticism it is. And it's a good point also of their perception of the voting behavior among the naturalized citizens. I had not thought of that, but that is definitely going onto the to-do list for the next iterations. Thanks so much.
Is it on? Sorry, me again. Again. I will keep this very quick. I think my previous question was not very clear, for which I apologise. And I think several people said it a lot better than me. But so I wanted to kind of reiterate that my question was, or my point was, that you started with this very kind of dry, formal understanding of citizenship. But then what you went to was much more about attitudes to citizenship. And the point this gentleman made was that maybe it's not really about citizenship at all. It's about nationalism, identity, membership, belonging. And I guess my question was, do you think the respondents in your survey in these different countries all really had the same understanding of citizenship when you asked them about it? Because I think that actually the Republican understanding of citizenship had such a massive resurgence around, we saw this turn to citizenship, we had citizenship ceremonies and citizenship tests and all of this, and citizenship education, and that was in Britain, but I think elsewhere. So, and I just wondered if actually this kind of very narrow liberal understanding, kind of emaciated understanding of citizenship only as status and political rights and military duties was actually not really what your respondents understood as citizenship, or if they really had any conception of what it meant. And actually they're responding, really they're talking about national belonging and national identity. Anyway, I will shut up now.
No, thanks so much. I think.
But thank you for your presentation. It's a really interesting topic.
No, thank you very much for this comment. I think I get it better now, and I agree that I don't know exactly what they associate with citizenship, right? And I think this would be important to look into. It, what exactly they understand, what is their association. Yeah, no, that's for sure.
And how would their attitudes change? Like, how would somebody in their eyes then become legitimate for these rights? Like, what would they have to do? You know, is it really there's nothing they can do? It's literally just where they're born, or what skin color they have. It would just be interesting to find out what would have to change for people to have these sorts of rights and duties.
Yeah. Thank you.
And also the remaining with her esteemed colleagues, Jessica Boyne and Alberto Fuochi. They're doing super interesting research and relevant research, pushing intergroup contact theory forward, really exploring its boundaries. And today she'll take us on an adventure. She shared with me her economic approach to doing research. So Giulia always has a few safe projects, and at the same time one big high-risk, high-gain project. And I had the privilege to be involved in one of the high-risk projects. It was a lot of fun. We have very interesting results, and I'll give Giulia the floor to talk to you about it.
Okay, thank you, Jasper. Thanks to Brias for the opportunity. So we are going to the, I would say, intrapsychic side of the talks today. I'm a social psychologist, and I'm talking about deprovincialization. So deprovincialization is a very long word, but it is very easy to understand if we split it in two. You have a D, so you get rid of provincialism, which means that you get rid of your centering in one small words and your feelings of threat when you are within new experiences, such as encounters with the other groups, which is the outgroup. So to know about deprovincialization, I always suggest a nice review by Verkoiten and other colleagues. But the concept was first introduced by Thomas Pettigrew in the 90s. So it is kind of old, but the operationalization are innovative and mostly new. So deprovincialization overall is a worldview characterized by two facets, two sides. One is the belief that the culture and the norms of the in-group, so one's group, one's community, are not the only legitimate ones. And this entails an idea of reduced ethnocentrism and reduced in-group centrism without disparaging one's group. So it is actually not a negative view of your group, just an attenuated view of the merits of your group. And the second part of deprovincialization is the other-oriented part, so curiosity and openness, acceptance toward the other groups and cultures. So it is a process. It means, in psychology, it means that we have a certain level of deprovincialization, all of us, but we can also work through it and increase it maybe through interventions. So how can we achieve deprovincialization? One way is to engage in contact with the other groups. This comes from the old theory by Pettigrew. So interacting with members of different social groups makes us more open-minded, okay? And the second thing we need to deprovincialize ourselves is a cognitive reframing of our views. So we know that positive contact with the outgroup is a good way to achieve deprovincialization, but we really need the cognitive part. So to change our mind, okay, to open our mind and to think of outgroups in different ways. Okay, so at this point, social psychologists will say, great, this is a nice tool to fight prejudice and negative attitudes toward the outgroup, but you may be a broader audience, so let's try to think of it in a broader way. We can take one step more and imagine that deprovincialization has some mechanisms that can help attenuate overall socio-cultural tensions, okay? So we know that two mechanisms of deprovincialization are relativizing the norms and cultures, okay, and accepting pluralism, and this can lead to reduced cultural polarization. Two other mechanisms of deprovincialization are achieving a greater cognitive and moral openness and having a more flexible understanding of one's identity, and this can help us reduce identity polarization. So the idea of a specific us versus them, which in social psychology we also call categorization. I have some water? No? Okay, I will go on. Okay, so at the beginning we said that, I can take my bottle. Just 1 second. Okay, so at the beginning we said that the deprovincialization has two sides. One is the abandonment of an in-group-centric perspective. One is the openness toward an acceptance of different cultures and groups. And to portray these two different sides, we have two different labels and two different validated scales. So one is group deprovincialization, which captures the in-group side a bit more, and then we have cultural deprovincialization. I am one of the authors who validated the scale, which captures the more out-group-oriented side of deprovincialization. Both scales are validated. They tap quite well into the two sides of deprovincialization. In fact, these are some items. I'm not gonna show you the entire scales. They are actually very short. So one has 4, the other has 6 items. They are on Likert type agreement scales. Very easy to use, very easy to translate. Okay, so these are the measures we have, and today I'm gonna present you a bunch, I would say a collection of different results from 3 different papers in which we use both sides of deprovincialization with different approaches. So first I'll let you show you what is the position of deprovincialization in a network of out-group experiences and social attitudes employing network analysis with cross-sectional self-report data. Second, this is a paper with slightly different aims, but it still has deprovincialization, so we will focus on that to understand what is the typical profile of highly deprovincialized people, so taking a person-centered approach. And third, we go to the experimental side of deprovincialization. We try to understand if it is possible to train it, so to increase the level of deprovincialization, and what happens if we train it. I mean, do we have some effects on behavioral intentions and attitudes? We are going to discover this. Okay, so part 1. So for those of you who already know network analysis, you may know it is very descriptive. So we are just putting together a selection of variables to understand how they are all related to each other simultaneously. I'm gonna portray a simple network analysis, but I did the same with exploratory graph analysis, which uses the actual location and the map is the same. So you can evaluate the relationships based on both the numbers, so the correlation coefficients, and the location in the network. So the variables I'm including are both cultural and group deprovincialization, positive and negative contact with the outgroup. In this case, we have immigrants. In many cases, we actually have immigrants as outgroup in social psychology. I'm including 2 very famous orientation to capture, I would say, the socio-political preferences of people. Okay, one is right-wing authoritarianism, which captures preference for authority, tradition, and conformity. The second one is a social dominance orientation. It captures preference for hierarchical group inequality, so that the groups remain different and distant in terms of power. And I also have some psychological variable. One is dispositional curiosity, to understand if deprovincialization is really part of something that is related to broader open-mindedness. And second, I have anxiety and prejudice toward the outgroup, so the more emotional and cognitive side of outgroup experience. Okay, so the circles, the nodes are the variables, the edges are the relationship among the variables. So we can see. Oh, and reddish dashed edges are negative links, and the green solid edges are positive links. You see it from the numbers as well. So the interesting thing here is that if we compare cultural and group deprovincialization, they are very, very strongly correlated with each other. I know the number is not that high, but you have to take into account the fact that it is a partial correlation of everything with everything. So the number is pretty high. So the two sides of the provincialization are very correlated with each other, but they are parts of two different sides. If you look at group deprovincialization, that is closer to social dominance orientation and right-wing authoritarianism. So it captures more the socio-political side of this process. On the other hand, if we look at cultural deprovincialization, it is closer to out-group experiences and attitudes and curiosity as well. So it captures more the openness and experiential, I would say, side of the deprovincialization process. So overall, both types of deprovincialization are forms of cognitive and cultural openness, but they are tapping into two different nuances. So going to the second part of this collection of results, with a completely different sample, we also used latent profile analysis to understand whether highly deprovincialized people also had a particular profile on, again, similar sociocultural but also cognitive variables. We included, again, the two types of deprovincialization. You already know social dominance orientation. We also added beliefs related to diversity, so how much one is open toward diversity and has pro-diversity beliefs, and some cognitive variables. Some of them are quite similar, but we really wanted to capture different nuances, so we have different facets of curiosity. We have cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to adapt thinking and behavior in response to changing situation. I know this is very psychological, so maybe not everything is clear now, but I can explain if something looks a bit unclear. So we have different sides of curiosity because we wanted to consider both the intrinsic motivation to seek out new experiences, which is the exploration part, but also how much one can engage with uncertainty and ambiguity, which is the tolerance to stress, and similar to that, we have the need for structure. So we wanted to understand how much deprovincialized people are really able to stay with the unknown. I mean, live with the unknown, the ambiguous, that is the part of intergroup experiences that most of the times threatens us in a psychological sense, okay? Okay, so the latent profile analysis, well, we tried to select a solution that was parsimonious as well as descriptive of our data. And we came up with a three-class solution. The labels have been called this way due to the aims of the paper. So the labels could seem weird a bit, but let me pass this. There's a reason why. So class 3 was the overall liberal class. I'm going to portray a description in the next slide. So just to give you a first look, we didn't have much difference on the need for structure scale, but all other variables were statistically significant in the differences among the profiles. So the three profiles really captured different types of individuals. So what we observed is that we had one class, which was socio-cognitive liberalization, which had high deprovincialization, high openness to experience, and to multiple perspectives. So a broad cognitive openness, okay, and flexibility, but also a very positive approach to diversity and egalitarian attitudes. So openness from both the cognitive and the socio-cultural side. In the second profile, we called it cognitive rigidity because we observed high openness to diversity and low social dominance orientation, but participants had very low scores on dimensions of cognitive openness and cognitive flexibility. And interestingly, they also had medium deprovincialization. This means that to be a highly deprovincialized people, you really need to endorse pro-diversity, pro-outgroup beliefs, but you also need a cognitive change. So you really need to have flexible cognitive schemas to accept the new, to accept the difference, okay? And lastly, we had the smallest class was the anti-liberalization profile, which had low scores on both sides of the provincialization and on all the dimensions of cognitive and socio-cultural openness. So it was pretty clear to us that to be highly deprovincialized, you really need some sort of cognitive change. Okay, maybe I can just go very fast through these. There was also a secondary aim of the paper and was to compare the outgroup experiences across different classes. And we also saw that people in the socio-cognitive liberalization profile, so the highly deprovincialized people, were people with the best experiences with the outgroup. So less negative, more positive. They were really positively oriented toward people from different groups. Okay, last part. So at some point we thought, okay, this is nice, but we need something more causal, or maybe we just want to understand whether we can act on deprovincialization and if deprovincialization really can make a change for behavioral intentions, okay, so for behavior in society. And we designed some experimental manipulations on both cultural and group deprovincialization to see the effects on national identification, so how much one identify with one's outgroup, in this case the country, and to see the effects on collective action. Now, collective action is very important for psychology because solidarity-based collective action includes all the possible forms of behavior oriented toward the improvement of the conditions of the outgroup. So when you sign a petition, when you go out in the streets for a march for a certain group, that's collective action. It can be normative, so within the legal system, it can be non-normative if you engage in actions that are actually not accepted by your country. This is very important because it is one of the few actions that the in-group can really take to protect the outgroup, okay? So we wanted to see whether inducing deprovincialization had an effect on this. So to induce deprovincialization, we created kind of short 2.5 minutes audio clips with reflecting writing task to do after the clip. So participants listened to the clip. It was kind of a guided meditation, but with a social focus, I would say. So for group deprovincialization, the focus of the audio clip was on relativism of in-group values. So your in-group values, yes, they are important, but they are only one of the options that exists in the real world. While the audio clip on cultural deprovincialization was focusing on the value in learning about cultural diversity, so more about the outgroups. We also had a combined culture and group deprovincialization manipulation with integrated sections of both the other two with counterbalanced order. And we have an active control condition with the description of an urban landscape. So participants were randomly assigned to one of the 4 conditions, and we also have manipulation and attention checks. I'm not bothering you with those. And the dependent variables were, so national identification measured with the iOS scale. This is also a very psychological scale with pictures, and the more you select pictures that are circles that are overlapping, the more you think that you overlap with your, you belong to your outgroup, I would say. You identify with your, with your in-group. You identify with your in-group, so in this case, the in-group was Italians. So the more they selected overlapping circles, the more they felt identified with the Italian group. And the other dependent variables were normative and non-normative collective action. They are, you can find example items here. So normative if you are within the legal system, non-normative if you are taking actions that are not legal. They are very classical measures of collective action. We also added in-group centered and out-group centered collective action, which is kind of a news in the literature. So the idea of having in-group and out-group centered collective action is to disentangle if you want to be sure that you're not having privilege, this is in-group centered collective action, or you want to be sure that the out-group has access to opportunities, okay? So one is on the conditions of the in-group, the other one is on the conditions of the out-group. These are really slight nuances. Okay, and these are simple mean comparisons with Taki-adjusted contrasts for multiple comparisons, and we saw that we observed some differences for national identification, meaning that respondents assigned to either the cultural or the group deprovincialization manipulation reported lower national identification compared to the control condition. And we also saw that in-group centered collective action was higher for all the types of manipulation compared to the control condition. And we also had some difference for out-group centered collective action between the integrated, so cultural and group deprovincialization manipulation condition and the control condition. When you see the bold numbers, they are statistically significant contrasts, and the different colors are really for the difference. On the other hand, we didn't have any effect of normative and non-normative collective action, so we might want to understand that maybe with other studies. Even though this study is already a part of a 3-study paper and we have cross-sectional results, basically finding similar patterns before this experimental test. Okay, so overall, so taking into account both descriptive and experimental results, we could say that deprovincialization is part of a network composed of liberal attitudes, curiosity, and overall positive experiences with the out-group. We can say that deprovincialization, when we take a person-centered approach, it appears accompanied by many forms of cognitive and cultural openness. Deprovincialization could be trained, we are still trying to understand that, and then be part of prejudice reduction interventions or other potential psychological intervention as a tool to foster collective action and intergroup solidarity. Thank you. Well, thanks to Brias in general and to my amazing co-authors involved in all these studies. They were really helpful, and yeah. So thank you.
Hi, thank you for the interesting presentation. I'm also coming from social psychology, but in the Netherlands. And for us, social identity theory is obviously very impactful. So I'm wondering how you kind of position this deprovincialization work in relation to the social identity research.
Yeah, this is a very nice question because I didn't explain it, but there is actually a very there is a strong relationship between social identity and group deprovincialization. This is why I was going to the very first slides. In fact, before these scales were built, these first forms of group deprovincializations were measured in many ways, and sometimes it was identification within groups, sometimes it was the level of identity you take. For instance, again, this is a very social psychology thing, but if you think of yourself as part of a broader in-group, okay, so let's say humans, speaking about social identity, but taking a very high level, that is very much related to group deprovincialization, because if you feel that you are part of a higher order identity, higher order group, you tend to attenuate the value of your small in-group values. So yes, it is. Yeah, that's very important to that part.
And then I guess as a little follow-up, with the training, how can you distinguish between having primed the superordinate group versus actually training them to be more open?
Well, I think that there is still a difference, because if we prime the superordinate identity, we are imposing the cognitive idea of an identity that is on a higher level. But if we train group deprovincialization, we are not asking them to think of a larger group, but only to put their in-group perspective, their in-group values in perspective with all the others. So I would say we are skipping the identity part and try to let them think that their in-group is just one of their values, their cultural values are just one of the many possibilities. So in some sense, we are avoiding the group belonging, I would say. Okay.
Thank you. I hope I understood enough of this. I think that certain things are just named different. I mean, I come from political science. They are named slightly differently, but they are somewhat the same.
It is.
So I have actually 3 questions. And one is following up on social identity theory, which has been lately super successful in political science. And now it's really good that you're saying on this slide, and now you also talked about these higher level identities. Mm-hmm. And I think that the first thing that in political science we learn when we look into social identity theory is that there is the need for positive identification, so the in-group, but there is also a need of differentiation. So for saying, okay, I am this and I am not that. So I think social identity theory has these 2 components, and that's why it's been very successful in political science, because they're both very important, right? And I wondered here in how far you go into measuring the differentiation, right? Because you have it's this very nice measurement that I think we can completely borrow, steal, whatever, on with the consent
while citing.
Yeah. I really wonder in how far there is this the ordering, right? It's taken into account, because you can think the differentiation is still very important in these processes, even though I understand maybe from this perspective it is a bit less. The second question, well, now I forgot. The second question was about. I'll go to the third one. So you call deprovincializations what I think in political science we would call the depolarization, right? And I really wonder and you have this in-group centrism, in how far you can depolarize or deprovincialize somebody who has what in political science I would call a very high salience for a positive identity, right? If I am attached to an idea of me and my group being, I don't know, Christians, white, whatever. I'm thinking of all the political discourse of the far right, for example, right, of the Christian roots, the cultural Christian roots of Europe. This has a lot to do with the way we look at, for example, migrant and all the discourse on Islamophobia. And I really wonder how you take into account the salience of identity in a design like this in social psychology.
We should measure it. So first, that's the answer. And I think that the point here is that you talked a lot about the positive differentiation, no? So the fact that you want to preserve your identity that is different, but it must also be a positive one, right? So the idea of group deprovincialization is really to have a balanced view on identities, so that you are able to say, I like my identity, I love my group, I belong to it, I'm attached to it, but I understand that in the world, everybody has his or her own group and identity, and everybody has the right to express their ideas that follow their group, because everybody has their histories, and so it is really about pluralism, I would say. So you're not disparaging your group, you're not saying, it could be bad. You're not acknowledging the fact that your views maybe have some issues or potential drawbacks. It is really about being simultaneously positive about one's belongings, but also understanding that there are other many belongings and identities that have the right to exist. So it is really about legitimacy.
A follow-up question. Yes. Threats. As a psychologist, you should. I imagine you're way more familiar with me than with the concept. So how this relates to the perception of threats, because I can recognize that you are different from me, and I accept that as long as you stay the hell away from me. Otherwise, vicinity. You come, right? I'm thinking again of Islamophobia could be a potential threat to me.
And this is why we also usually measure intergroup contact with deprovincialization, because that's really, I would say, like the behavioral part. At some point, you also need to live with not only accept that their views are legitimate, but you also need to live with other people. So it is always good to understand whether these are people who also enjoy being with the outgroup. And in most of the cases, with highly deprovincialized people, yes, from the latent profile analysis, but maybe we can dig a little bit deeper on this. And I think that the threat idea, that's really the core. Deprovincialization is really about not being threatened. So you really captured, I think, the core of the process, because deprovincialization is really about not being threatened by the others' identities and ideas, and thinking that everybody can coexist, even though we can fear a bit, we can have sometimes negative feelings, but we can work through it, understand that, again, everybody has the right to be different and have different views. So I think that the threat is really the core.
It's my turn. Hi.
Hi.
So I'm also a social psychologist. Thank you so much for the presentation. I also had 2 questions related to social identity, to be original. The first one was on the second study, the experimental study. So you measure the quantity of kind of like the identification to the national, to the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering to what extent training to deprovincialization is not about changing also the content of the national identity. Being like, I'm proud to identify and belonging to a country that's like open and like in the acceptance of like other culture, nationalities, etc. So that's my first question. Is it not more about the qualitative, the content of the identity rather than the strength of the identification? And the second one is about the dual identity. Is it not? So basically, in the common in-group model that you probably refer to, saying that when you answered the first question, I think, saying that like when you identify with the humanity, and then there's like less intergroup conflicts and stuff like that. But there's also literature on a dual identity saying basically, to what I understand, I have my culture, my in-group, my country that exists in a world, in the humanity with like other countries, culture, etc. So I'm wondering whether there's a link between the idea of like, okay, I identify to the like the subordinate group, which is the national identity, but also to the humanity. Then I see that like every culture is the same, and it also could relate to the perception of threats. Because if you don't feel recognized, if you don't feel like the culture and the identity of your country is recognized, then maybe the dual identity and the deprovincialization is not working. I don't know if it's clear.
Okay, these are very interesting points. So the first one was about... Yeah, I think it is really, I think that the content changes because it is, I mean, if you deprovincialize, you relate to your group, your identities in a different way. So yes, it could be that content that changes, especially if you can think of your group as a group that is more open and so on. So yes, that could work. Well, if you have a group that is open, I mean, if you can reach that content, that would, I think that could work. And for the dual identity part, so you thought of double identity in terms of both like the in-group national one and the higher order one, right? Okay. So ideally, it could work, having a dual identity could work very well. The problem is that sometimes people have a dual identity, but in that in the higher order identity, sometimes not all the groups are really included. I don't know if I'm clear when I say this. One can say, oh yeah, I'm very, I don't know, I'm very human. I believe that all of us should be equal and treated in the same way, but then you measure attitudes toward a very despised group, and at some point you discover they have prejudice. So yes, I mean, one should really focus into that and see if the dual identity translates into openness toward all the groups, especially despised groups that are seen negatively in society, I would say.
Thank you. I have a very simple question. After the deprovincialization, would you promote about contents and values, a melting pot or a big salad?
A melting pot of?
A big salad.
Okay. You mean a big salad of people?
Yes, of groups. I mean, in which every group would keep the values, the contents, its own values, or a big melting pot, or you have this kind of big mix of whatever you have.
So, you said simple question. I was expecting a simple one. Okay. Traditionally, intergroup contact theory says that when you mix people from different groups together, you always have, if they have positive encounters, okay, you always have positive consequences for intergroup relations. So basically, at some point, they know each other a bit more. But the most important thing is that besides knowing each other, they share experiences, and especially their emotions toward other groups start to change. So they become more empathetic toward the outgroup, but especially they feel less anxious. And this is related to threat, as we were saying before. So the theoretical answer would be, yes, it is good to mix many people together from different groups, because if you mix people together, they meet a lot, and their anxiety in the intergroup encounters diminish, okay? And by diminishing those negative emotions, intergroup relations become more harmonious. So this would be the theoretical answer. If I have to say, it really depends on the outgroups and the relations they have. What are the conflicts? Do they have a problem, like, do they share territory? Do they fight for something? Have these outgroups similar interests? Are they in a competitive relationship? That changes everything. So if we mix everything in a salad, we have to be sure that all the flavors combine in a good way.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay.
I was just wondering if you're planning to, or did you check to apply it on political polarization? Because what I'm thinking, like people in the opposing political ideas, they are still in the same group. So yeah, they share the same group identity, but then they have different values.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I really would like to do that. In fact, when I got at the end of this presentation and I understood that in fact maybe many of you were not social psychologists, I thought it is a pity that we didn't include many variables that could be interesting for political sciences, and we do not even have political orientation. But I think that, well, maybe we can chat later, but I think it could be very, very interesting to go on that side and try to understand what happens from that perspective. I don't know, do you have suggestions? Would you have liked to?
I'm actually also from social psychology. I was just wondering.
Okay. I thought,
if what would you expect from your results?
What do I expect?
Yeah. Like, do you expect to have the same processes, that it also fosters a bit more openness?
Yeah, I would expect similar results. But maybe there could be some resistance. I don't know if you, depending on the beliefs. So maybe I would expect similar patterns, but maybe not everything would be so simple, especially if we have to train it.
I was thinking if I can just jump in, because I had a question precisely about that for your third study. And in that respect, actually, I was wondering a bit about the external validity of your sample. Because, I mean, on some of these samples, you have quite a lot of students but I don't know if that also applies to the third study, the one about collective action. Because there, for instance, I mean, we know that in terms of engagement, I mean, that changes a lot across age cohorts. And then, since you mentioned left-right political orientation, you're studying this in Italy among Italian people with respect to Arabs in a context of unprecedented criminalization of collective action by state authorities. So in that respect, you may do, I mean, we already know left and right in terms of collective action that changes, but there may also be quite a lot of contextual factors playing in.
I fully agree. Yeah, I fully agree. So about the sample, most of the times, well, first they are all convenient sample. I don't know if I mentioned before, but most of the times our samples are half composed of university students and the other half of other people. In this case, I don't have the percentages, but the sample is older, so we actually have a bit more respondents from the general population, so they are not all of them are students. We usually try to exclude psychology students only because they are more sensitive to the measure, so this is something that can be important. But you are right. In fact, I wasn't really, I mean, the choice of the outgroup was also not my choice, I would say. And I think that it is a very specific outgroup that maybe people have problems with in terms of cultural clashes about religion, but it is different from rights, the rights you want to support. Even though we kind of have some fight for the rights to engage in religious acts or have religious places within workplaces. So I would say there are some cases in which this is relevant, but maybe it is not the most, maybe it is a situation that still appears safe. A type of collective action that still appears safe in Italy, yes. I don't know if I answered your question, but...
I mean, I think some of these things you cannot control for in this sample. Of course, it would have been interesting to see if you change the condition, pretty much like Bruno was doing in his research, and then you change Arabs with another minority and you see whether that plays in, because the Arabs are a quite extreme case of outgroup for some category of people. And if you go left-right, clearly on the right, they are considered more outgroup than other migrant minorities in Europe. So, but of course, you cannot do it with this study.
No, but we can. No, but maybe I can propose to my co-authors to go on with other studies and try different types of outgroups and different types of. Yeah, we can keep the measures, but try with different contexts and understand if something changes. But I agree. And we should have controlled, I think, for more attitudinal and political variables at some point. We really wanted to keep the questionnaire short, also because we pre-registered. And when you pre-register, you kind of like select what you really expect, and we didn't want to go too far with the hypothesis, but you're right.
Are there other questions? Also, if you still have questions for the first presenter, don't hesitate to jump in. Anyone?
Thank you. Just to follow back on, on our previous exchange, if you go on the route of dual identity, maybe what could happen based on what you were saying is in-group projection. So basically, okay, we belong to the same humanity, but as long as you look like me and have the same culture as me. So maybe you could also control for that in a follow-up study, because obviously that would work if people were like not into competition, to be like, okay, but we are all humans, but my culture is more human. than yours, something like that. Maybe that would kind of moderate or like prevent some people to actually be trained to think like that.
You know, this is very interesting because it would be a completely different paper, I think. Meaning that at some point we could dig into the relationship between the types of identities and deprovincialization. Because when we, if you train deprovincialization and you don't really mention identity, you are kind of leaving the group belonging aside, which in one way is good, because if you don't talk about the group, usually people are not aware of it. I don't know. To really be aware of the identity, you need some sort of intergroup situation, usually. It's not like everybody walks in the street to think about their group belongings. Okay. So as you need to be aware of group membership, otherwise it's not always salient. It could be good to understand what happens if both things are salient at the same time. So in this case, we really don't have any identity salient, and it is a choice. But yeah, in a future paper, maybe we could try to see the relationships and see maybe if a dual identity helps, for instance, group deprovincialization. Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation, and I have a curiosity.
I can hear, actually.
You can
okay.
hear me? I don't know if you can hear better, but I was wondering, do you think that on top of the cultural factor and the idea of cultural openness, there's also, however we want to put it, a class or a socioeconomic element as well? That is, I'm not sure how you could include that in the design, maybe of future studies, but I have an intuition that maybe that might play a role also in explaining. Are people more open and tolerant towards groups of other cultures if they share a similar class background, or not? I assume that it could play a role, so that maybe just something to integrate in future studies.
Yeah, I think, so you really talk about social class, right?
Yes.
But when you talk about social class, maybe you also mean that they share the similar experiences and spaces.
Exactly.
Yes. And that would also relate to within or intergroup contact as well. Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that would be one way to connect. In fact, again, it is related to identity, because we have maybe an identity of one identity on some level, but we have different groups' identities that make us closer, even if we are different on other levels. Yes, very good point.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We still have some time, so do not hesitate. Otherwise, this has been a particularly long session, so we can also conclude a bit early. But thank you to both speakers, and thank you for everyone in attendance.
Thank you.